Welcome to Session 5, Engaging a Diverse Community and Civic Engagement. When thinking about building diverse boards, it's important to understand what we mean when we say equity. United Way Worldwide defines equity as the intentional inclusion of everyone in society. Equity is achieved when systemic, institutional, and historical barriers based on race, gender, sexual orientation, and other identities are dismantled and no longer predict socioeconomic, education, and health outcomes. United Way's vision for equity is we recognize that structural racism and other forms of oppression have contributed to persistent disparities, which United Way seeks to dismantle. Our United Way network strives to engage community members, especially those whose voices have traditionally been marginalized. We work with residents and public and private partners to co-create solutions that ensure everyone has the resources, supports, opportunities, and networks they need to thrive. We commit to leveraging all of our assets, convening strategic investments, awareness building, and advocacy to create more equitable communities. One way that nonprofit organizations can ensure that we are all working towards equity in our community is by building a diverse board. Why is having a diverse board important? Diversity and the wide range of perspectives that accompany it are critical to good governance. Diversity reflects the real world. Organizations have a diverse set of stakeholders, and bringing in diverse perspectives means tackling the same idea from various angles. Secondly, successfully meeting the continual challenges and complexities of organizations requires having a diverse set of competencies as a primary resource. Boards need members with a wide range of experiences to help them anticipate change, assess risks, and discover opportunity. Many different variables come to mind when attempts to describe and define diversity, such as age, ethnicity, gender, skills, experiences, competencies, philosophies, life experiences, race, religion, and socioeconomic background. All are important to see if they're equally represented on your board. When building a diverse board, there are three strategies from the article Beyond Political Correctness, Building a Diverse Board. The first is to communicate. Your board should have an open, thoughtful discussion to consider how it and your organization, community, and constituents might benefit from diversity with the board. The second step is to act. Develop a case and plan for change. To help your board develop, articulate, and embrace a shared vision for inclusiveness, it is important to write a compelling case statement. Consider incorporating your board's definition of inclusiveness. One organization's definition may not be another's definition. Data about your community, a description of what your board will look like and feel like when inclusive, an indication of how inclusiveness relates to or will impact the board's ability to fulfill your organization's mission, and inform about how you plan to put your commitment to inclusiveness into action. To put your commitment into action, develop a plan that includes strategies, concrete goals, objectives, tasks, and a timeline. Boards are more likely to focus on an issue if an official goal or policy exists to remind them of what they want to achieve. Third, monitor and measure results. To stay focused on your objectives and goals, monitor your progress on a quarterly or semi-annual basis. Track your retention rates of diverse members, conduct exit interviews to further assess your progress, and identify areas where you could improve. Administer board self-assessments that include questions related to diversity strategies and goals. Survey staff, constituents, and stakeholders about their perceptions of the organization's culture of inclusiveness. Part of building a diverse board is actively being engaged in your community, assessing community issues, listening to community voices, and making sure that the work you're doing is reflecting the needs of your community. Now let's hear from an expert. Okay. Hi, we are with Colleen Frein, Membership Director of the Mason City Chamber of Commerce, and we are going to be talking about engaging a diverse community and civic engagement as a board member. Thank you so much for joining us today. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself and your role in creating a diverse community and civic engagement?
Absolutely, thank you. So I work for the Chamber of Commerce, which is actually a nonprofit organization, which is overseen by a board. So I have a vested interest in encouraging board participation, both for, of course, us at the Chamber, but also for all the members that we serve in the Chamber of Commerce. So in addition to working for a nonprofit, I also serve on several nonprofit boards. I do serve as the vice president right now of the Charlie Brown Preschool and Daycare Board of Directors. I also serve on the Trinity Lutheran Church Council. It's not technically a nonprofit, but I'm also the president this year of River City Kiwanis, which is an organization that works within the community and is run by a board of directors as well. I have also staffed most of our chamber committees, which I sometimes refer to as their own little mini boards at some point in my 5 years here at the chamber. So I've definitely seen groups of people that have been very successful in what they're doing, and some very diverse groups, and others that were less diverse and less successful because of it. One thing that I have learned, and it was something that was suggested to me when I started at the chamber, and I really took it to heart, is as you start to think about how you want to get involved and what places you want to give your time, whether it's on the board of directors or as a volunteer, what really matters is finding out what you're interested in before committing to things. And it's okay to come and try things out sometimes, but really, if you aren't passionate about what you're involved in, you'll end up finding yourself overcommitted and burned out. And that does not make you a great board member. That makes you an absent board member a lot of the time. And it also makes it less likely that you're going to be a great advocate for the board that you're representing.
I think that's such an important point because I feel like there's a lot of just kind of in our culture to say yes when asked to do things. It's a Midwest thing, but not only does it hurt you, it does hurt the organization to not have passionate members on their board, because that's one of the things that nonprofits are all about is following your passion to help people. And if it's not your passion, that's okay. There's so many different things out there that would fit your passion, and it's a benefit to both you and the organization if it's not a right fit to just declare that.
Exactly.
So that's awesome. You've done a lot of work in the community, and around community engagement. And one of the things that I thought you said was really interesting is that you saw in your committee work that sometimes the more diverse the committee members were, the more successful that was. What do you think kind of drove that?
So I really see that, especially right now, as we are in such a challenging and unprecedented time dealing with COVID shutdowns and reopenings and all the things that we've been going through in the last several months. What I've seen is the groups where people are coming from a lot of different perspectives. For example, I just sat in on a committee meeting where one of the members is a parent who is the sole income provider for his family, and he doesn't get salary. He's paid on when he works. Another person works for an elderly assistance home. He's also from out of state, and his father had recently been dealing with COVID. And then another person is a younger person who goes out and does some of those things that older people may not be so accustomed to doing, but is also cognizant of where people are at. So when we're having discussions about, meeting in person and some of these things that people are talking about right now, it was great to hear from all those different perspectives because they each bring a unique perspective to a final decision. If we were all meeting together and all of us were in our offices every day and had a salaried income and we all made middle income, we would probably have arrived at a different decision than we did because we had that diversity of different places, different occupations, different financial abilities and really different backgrounds.
I think that really touches on the first question of why diversity on a board is important to the success of an organization. Um, what what other why else might diversity be important in that role?
Yeah, so it's so important. And a lot of times we think about diversity and right away we go toward race, which is incredibly important. It's one of the top things to have people from different backgrounds, different races on your board. However, we have to be realistic that we are in North Iowa and, we do not have the most diverse background. But so when you think about diversity, I think especially in North Iowa, you also have to think about other types of diversity, gender diversity, sexual orientation diversity, also a diversity in financial status. And I really feel, and it's probably because of my role at the chamber, a diversity in occupation is incredibly important to be able to hear from those who maybe work on a line versus those who work in a service industry. They're going to have different perspectives as you're coming into things. I also think that's important because your goal with your board is not for them all to row in the same direction as you. The goal really is to operate a ship, if you will. So you don't just need people rowing, you also need people who have been through this before and can say there's a island up ahead in this metaphorical sense. You also need people who have never been through this before and may have a fresh perspective on what you're dealing with. You also need people who are big thinkers, people who really are kind of thinking outside the box or are thinking of new ideas for your organization. You also need on the other side of that some very detail-oriented person. So people who will maybe dig into the financials when no one else wants to. So it is important to have people, when you say diversity, to really be thinking about all those different levels of diversity that one needs to have a great board.
I think one of the important points that you brought up was the diversity in financial standing. Because as you see in the nonprofit world, you think you have to have a board member filled with people able to do major giving. But that also doesn't make a strong board, because what you'll see is that people are generous at all levels of income, but they bring so many different perspectives. It makes such a stronger organization to have that kind of diverse background on a board, because you get to see all of the perspectives, and helping people, which is what most nonprofits are out to do, is not primarily about just giving funding out or raising as much funding as possible. It's what's the best way that we can achieve our mission. And that knowledge is not only in those with deep pockets, I guess.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. And some of the most well-connected people may be some of on the lower economic status. People who have lived in North Iowa forever may know a lot of people that you don't realize they know. On the other token, I think that wealth of time is often as important as wealth of money, because if somebody has a lot of time and passion to give to your organization, oftentimes that's more important than what's in their bank account.
Yeah, right. Very, very true. So sometimes, though, one of the issues that you'll run into on a board is you have your board and then somebody cycles off, so you ask them to get their friends and then their friends, and so you do sometimes get a not diverse board. And so because we all travel in our own little circles of influence, and so how can an organization begin the work of diversifying their board if they need to start there?
Absolutely. I think the first thing you need to do is look at what the strengths of your board are and look at where your board is lacking. So if you do have a lot of those detail-oriented people, you may need to think about, all right, we need to step back and find someone who can look at the big picture in this. If you're looking around your room and you realize we're all over the age of 40, well, we need to start finding some young people to represent us on the board here as well. So trying to figure out where you're lacking is the first thing. I'm sure at this point you've probably heard the term PMS problem, pale, male, and stale. So if your board is pale, male, and stale, then you have a lot of work ahead of you. Fortunately, I think that most of our nonprofit organizations have really kind of turned the tides against that. And as you look around a lot of rooms, you'll see a good diversity in that. One thing that I always stress is to look at people who you may be associated with, but you aren't friends with.
Mm-hmm.
So like you mentioned, it's very common that we go and ask our friends to serve alongside us on the board. But really then you're just, you could go have coffee with that person and spend that time better spent than sitting around a board table or a discussion table. So really to look at some of the acquaintances that you might have that maybe you have you've admired the way that they've handled a certain situation, or you've noticed that they've done, this, that, and the other within their organization. Ask them what they're passionate about and see if that might be a good fit for your board.
One of the problems that boards can kind of run into is getting into that groupthink mentality. How do you think a board member can guard against groupthink when they see it?
Yes. So my mother is an incredibly wise woman, and I remember when I was a young kid, we were in a classroom situation and I was afraid to raise my hand. I had a question, I think, at this point, and I was a little bit timid, and I thought, nah, somebody else will ask and somebody else will say something. And my mother told me when I was young, if you have a question, always raise your hand and ask it. Because if you are asking that question, chances are at least one or two other people in that classroom have the same question as you do. So I think oftentimes at these board meetings, it can be very tempting just to go with the flow. And if nobody's really saying anything, then you just say, nah, okay, let's just go with it. But really, if you have a voice inside you that says, I wonder about X, Y, or Z, chances are other people sitting at that table are probably having the same questions, but they have the same doubt as you do whether or not they should raise an issue about it. Because most people that serve on boards, they're not there to cause a stink. They're not there to ruffle feathers. But that's not what you're doing. What you're doing is just kind of thinking through all the options and thinking through any consideration that needs to be out there. And ultimately, it's better for your board to discuss it and to think about those issues rather than to just ignore them.
I think that is a great point, and I think having a little bit of bravery, even if it's just to raise your hand, is kind of an essential part of being a board member, because you're right, they're not there to ruffle feathers, but they are there to help lead an organization, and leadership means asking those questions when you have them. So how should a board lead in civic engagement on behalf of an organization?
So I think, again, to my work on the Charlie Brown Board of Directors, and then as a staff member for the chamber and thinking about our chamber board of directors, and especially in the last year, how important boards of directors have become to organizations. Because in the last year, there have been so many situations. Let's start with a childcare issue. Childcare obviously has come up in the last year as being such an essential part of our economy. And that's something that the childcare establishments have been saying for quite some time now, but people probably weren't hearing as well as they should until it became an issue for them. Right now, those childcare establishments really are leaning on their boards to speak for them and say, hey, look over here, we need to be paying attention to this. Because if the executive director of the organization says it, well, obviously they care. They're the executive director. They want to see, their organization succeed and make money and whatever it might be and serve their people. But when the board's coming up front and saying, you need to be paying attention to this, the board member doesn't have to say that. The board member is speaking, again, out of passion, out of a vested interest in this organization's continued ability to serve the community. And so to hear a board member say something oftentimes can speak louder than if that staff member is speaking. And then I think to the chamber side of things, and this is, something that I'm personally interested in, is our chambers were left out of PPP funding. Well, our chambers, argued that point till we were blue in the face, but of course we're going to argue for that because we want to be able to pay our staff members. It's not until the board of directors raises their hand and says, hey, did you realize the chambers are not part of this? they're the ones that are being listened to, for better or worse, because they're not the ones that, ultimately they benefit from it because they have a stronger chamber of commerce, but they aren't directly benefiting in that moment. They're just speaking as an advocate on our behalf. So I think in both cases, that's an example of how your board of directors really can kind of step in and be a middleman between your staff, your paid staff, and then the community, to say, hey, this is something that's important. This is something you need to be paying attention to, and then help you navigate toward the staff to take care of it.
So this whole bold leadership program that we're launching, it's going to people who might just be interested in board leadership, might have, but are afraid to commit. What would you say to someone who's thinking about serving on a board, as someone with experience, as someone who's worked with nonprofits? What does board service do for you and in your community?
I think a lot of times when people initially begin to think about board service, they think about their resume. I mean, quite frankly, we're all a little bit selfish in our ways. We think about how this would look on our resume. But really, I go back to, if you're not passionate about it, there's no purpose for you to do it. Whether or not it's on your resume, if you have not been involved in that interview, let's just, again, think selfishly, can be able to say, here's what I've done to help out this organization. Doesn't matter if it's on your resume or not. Really what it comes down to is, if you're interested in serving on a board, look at those organizations that you're excited about, that you care about. Maybe you come from a position where you needed to use the food bank as a child. Well, the food bank might be a great way for you to now give back by serving on their board or by volunteering with them. So just really thinking about organizations that have impacted you, organizations that may impact your children or those who you love, and then making sure that it's somewhere that you can give the time and that you have the time to give to them. So those are some things I would be thinking about as you are looking for what to be part of. On the flip side of that, I highly encourage people to get involved with boards of directors and being on the board of a nonprofit organization, because it opens your eyes to so many things that you never would have really thought about otherwise in your day-to-day life. Just serving on the Trinity Council, I am so much more aware of, the workings of our congregation and some of the issues that come up with different people in our congregation, and some of the different mission work that's being done. On the Charlie Brown Board of Directors, I would have had no idea how many, like the fact that childcare workers get paid $8 or $9 an hour when someone who works at Hobby Lobby now is being paid $17 an hour. There's a lot of dynamics that go into that. And that's something that I'm learning about from serving on the board. And that's helping me as a professional as I'm now thinking about this from a business standpoint. So you're going to learn a lot about your community. You're going to learn a lot about things that you're passionate about, hopefully. And it'll help you grow as a leader as well by being part of that. And just learning, again, to trust your voice and to speak when you have a question about something. And it makes you feel good to be able to give back.
Well, thank you so much for talking with us today about diversity and community engagement here in North Iowa and board service. We really appreciate your insight and want to say thank you for your time.
Thank you.
All right.